Agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Monash.
Deputy Speaker, in 1968 I moved to a small community called Pakenham and started my own business as an 18-year-old. That was probably unusual for an 18-year-old to be beginning a business, but I came out of a family of entrepreneurs and it was just normal for us that's what you do, create yourself a job. That community was an integrated community which we didn't understand. It was an hour and a quarter from Melbourne, from the CBD, so it was a country community built around sport, business, racing club, horse racing club, football clubs, town hall committee, women's groups, CWA, all the things that a small country community, but everybody is linked. So a young person that comes into the community is grabbed into the integration of that community straight away. And then you had the Pakenham Bush Nursing Hospital. That's provided through local doctors and then the whole nursing regime of that time, and the most feared woman in the town was the matron of the hospital, because she ran the show. So they provided paediatric services, palliative care services, breaks and scratches and cuts and bites, and all done within this community by the local doctors as part of the Bush Nursing Hospital system. And because I've got the time, I'm going to tell you that the Bush Nursing Hospital system in Victoria was created because 25% of women in country communities were dying in childbirth. And with council and state government, they got together, as compared to the city, which was about 5 or 6% of people in those times. So these country communities right across Victoria got together and created Bush Nursing Hospital systems and drove the death in childbirth down to that of the city. And that's what these Bush Nursing Hospitals were all about. Really important to women in community. So, as an 18-year-old, we realised that in our Bush Nursing Hospital, the vast number of patients were elderly people either needing care or in palliative care, but usually needing care because they could no longer cope at home. What did we do? We drew them into the heart of the community like that, and they went to the Bush Nursing Hospital and were cared for there. That was probably not going to work, because if all your beds were filled up with ageing residents and there was nowhere for your new babies to come, because a few years later my twins were born and my beautiful daughter Emily was born there, and my twins were born there at the Bush Nursing Hospital. So you're never going to have enough beds for the reasonable support of the community if all your beds were filled up. So the community decided we need a dedicated aged care facility right next to our Bush Nursing Hospital. So, of course, a fundraising committee was created. I think my idea was to call the fundraising program A Cry from the Heart, from the elderly to the rest of the community. That's what we did. And we raised the money to build the dedicated facility on site, which is still flourishing today as an aged care facility. The hospital, sadly, is gone. The paediatric services have gone. The palliative care services have gone. The cuts and scratches and bruises are now done by the doctor or off to Casey Hospital in my dear friend the Latrobe, member for Latrobe's electorate, which is a marvellous facility, along with St John of God next door to it. So healthcare services and provision have changed dramatically, but we raised the money for the aged care centre. And I tell you the story about aged care because I've been connected to aged care for all of my life, not only my political career but my business career as well. And at the same time I chaired the local disability centre, where we needed a daycare centre for people with disabilities. And that's another whole story in itself. My greatest learning experience ever was living the life of chairman of Minibar our disability centre. That's where you learn how people really do it hard when they've got disabled children. So aged care has been evolving for a long time. And I make the point, and now I come to today, where we've only recently had an election campaign, and I'm going to refer where aged care was an item of discussion amongst the parties. In fact, it was used to beat the former Morrison government with a stick over aged care. But I take you back to 1998, when I was the member for Macmillan, and the Howard government had then decided to reform aged care. Actually very good reforms, but politically very dangerous, which the Labor Party picked up on very quickly in that campaign in 1998 and used it very effectively as a stick against the then Howard government. And I had said to Mr Howard, the Prime Minister at the time, please do not do these reforms in your first term, wait till your second term, because of my knowledge of the interaction between families, their inheritance, how we're going to move a person who has a home as an asset into an aged care facility using that asset as a bond. That was seen to be removing the children's inheritance. So, as part of my loss in that campaign was a very strong campaign by the Labor Party against those reforms. The sad part about that was, because of that loss over aged care and losing that battle over aged care, the good reforms were not put into place, which are playing out today and have played out ever since that time, even though we have reformed and reformed very well that transition from your home to a new living home in aged care. Aged care should be another step in life. It is not the end or a death sentence. It's just a different way of caring for people in our community. That's how it should be, and I believe is today. The last campaign, especially by the Nursing Federation, which branch I'm not sure, that said all aged care is terrible, don't go there. All aged care, all the people working in aged care are under pressure, they're this or that. Of course they are, and I pay tribute, like the member for Dunkley did, in regard to those people who worked through COVID and all the issues around the facility and the provision of aged care. But mostly, they sent a message to all aged care providers that they were not told the community that things are terrible in aged care. There were some areas that the Royal Commission pointed out very clearly that needed addressing. And both sides of the House have committed to addressing those issues. My point is, because of the 1998 campaign, there were consequences for aged care that were negative. And because of the last campaign, there are consequences for aged care, and I believe they're negative. If we can get a positive out of it, well and good. But we left a stain where, why would you choose to go into aged care if all of these arguments around aged care, all of these propositions, are that this isn't a good place to go and work? Things are crook in aged care. Why would you go to aged care? Well, the people that have a real heart for delivery of service to the clientele in aged care, they are praised by me right across my electorate. And I even got to the point where I had to send each organisation a note to say how much we have high regard for the services that they deliver, and apologise for all the negativity that had surrounded the argument or the debate around aged care, its delivery and its service. And I think I can say this now, long time after the event. Prime Minister John Howard said to me, just before his government was defeated, "Russell, do not ask me for any more money for aged care, because we have delivered in buckets." And he had. But the need in aged care, the exponential growth that came, that the Labor Party knew about in 1998, we all knew the exponential growth was coming. And that's why that negative campaign then and the reforms that couldn't be introduced then have a long-term consequence, because we're still catching up, we're still catching up, we're still catching up. And it's been, for the whole of the time I've been in this House, we've been catch up, catch up, catch up, because the need was always greater than the government's ability to keep up with that need. So we're paying the price today for bad decisions, probably made by both parties, because we were fearful to make the reforms we needed to make. And that was a political decision. So when you make those political decisions, there are always consequences. It may have, in my case, one of the reasons it caused my demise in that election campaign. However, we pay the consequences today for those decisions that were made by political parties during the heat and battle of an election campaign. But remember, every decision that you take has consequences. So when the Royal Commission says you need a registered nurse 24 hours a day in every aged care facility, that sounds great. And for those facilities that can afford that, and they already are, and delivering that service. But there are other communities that just cannot, because of the size and scale of their organisation, afford to have an RN. Secondly, they may not have access to an RN if you're in remote communities or even in regional communities like mine, because of the competition from the local hospital, the competition from the local GP or clinic, and the competition especially from other aged care facilities in that district. These are all the issues that I have to look at as a local member before I can blindly and give blanket support to a proposition, because I need to know how that proposition is going to affect my aged care facilities in my electorate on the ground. What will be the outcome of a blanket decision like that? Now, the government said, no, but we're offering you exemptions, Russell. We're offering you exemptions, but there's no detail around the exemptions. I already have an issue with my aged care facilities because of the pressure that COVID has put on, because of our regionality, where we are, our access to human resources. You can't just go down the street in Foster and grab another RN. You can't just go down the street in Foster and grab another aged care worker, because they're not there. They have to come from the district. So you're competing with other districts for the minimal resources that are there as far as an aged care workforce goes. Quite different in the city, but for us it's difficult. So we've just had an EBA that is going to come out around 3.5% as a wage increase. But the government's only given them a 1.5% increase, so you're already 1.75 down in the outworking of the finances of the organisation. And worse than that, when you can't get somebody and you need somebody on deck in the aged care facilities, you have to go to an agency. And of course the agency cost is far higher than the wage cost of a permanent worker. So there are a lot of issues around aged care that I'm asking the government just to address those very carefully, having regard to the impact that will have on regional facilities. That's where I've got to stand with my regional facilities. I've got to stand with my own people, because I want ageing in place. It has been a tenet of mine for as long as I've been in this place, that the aged care facility needs to be in the community in which the person lives. And there lies the great difference. If we can have ageing in place, That is my desire. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.